Joseph, just a few days ago, an article penned, an article penned by yourself and entitled "A Disappearing Lake Leads to Dangerous Protests in Iran" appeared on US-based Newsweek. Türkan briefly mentioned what it is about. There is this environmental catastrophe which is underway, which is huge. It is about one of the biggest lakes in the region, in the Middle East, which is drying up in a very speedy manner. Why did you decide to focus on this very issue, and what kind of implications these ecological catastrophe might have, and why should the international community care?
Thank you, Rusif. So, Lake Urmia is the largest ecological threat to the Middle East. And it's very pressing. It's a very pressing threat to the Azerbaijani community. It was once the largest saltwater lake in the Middle East region. It was home to a variety of fauna. It was home to flamingos, endemic brine shrimp. It also served as the economic lifeline of the region. It was a hub for tourism, a hub for commercial fishing, so very important to the locals there. Now at this point, the lake has shrunk 95%. And this is all due to water mismanagement and negligence, some of which may even be intentional. The Iranian government has been warned since the 1990s that their practices of damming up the feeder rivers to the lake are just unsustainable. And if the lake were to dry up completely, which currently it's on track to do, 4 million people would be displaced. This number, by the way, it's not my number, it's the number of Isa Kalantari, who is an Iranian politician who served as the former vice president, and he also served previously as the head of the Department of the Environment. So that's his number. Some activists actually put the number higher, at 15 million people. I think in this case, where there's a discrepancy between activists as well as the government, the true figure is probably somewhere in the middle. Even if it is just 4 million, that would be the second largest displacement caused by an ecological disaster in the history of the world. So, in the local residents, the Azerbaijanis, they are convinced that this mismanagement, that this neglect, it all works into the long history of discrimination against them. They're right. They're definitely right. And just a few weeks ago, in the city of Erdebil, which is on the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijani activists actually posted flyers condemning the Iranian government's plan to divert water from the Caspian Sea to the ethnically Persian province of Semnan. This is a province, a very arid province, that is actually known to waste water just due to outdated irrigation technology. At the same time, they're looking at their Lake Urmia and they're seeing that it's dying. And no real action has been taken. The only real action, in fact, has been from the United Nations Development Program in partnership with the Japanese government, out of all groups. And they've spent a few million trying to restore the lake over the past few decades. However, this hasn't really gone anywhere. From the Iranian government, we're actually seeing the opposite. So they're still constructing dams. They even built a highway right through the middle of the lake, cutting off the flow from one side to the other. Last year, Voice of America, their Farsi service, released a report saying that this negligence could be on purpose in order for the Iranian regime to then mine lithium from the lake bed. Some activists paint an even darker picture. They say that this is a Stalinist-like technique, a Stalinist-like tactic, trying to destroy the Azerbaijani region once and for all. With the Iranian government, I'll be honest with you guys, it's hard to tell whether it's malevolence or crippling incompetence. That's, either could be true. It really could. So this is why we've seen a lot of protests in recent weeks and recent months in the Azerbaijani regions. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has, of course, come out and said it's a foreign plot. They just dismiss it. Some Iranian academics have very naturally blamed Israel. However, the truth is that the desiccation of Lake Urmia, it's an existential threat to the Azerbaijani community. As I wrote in my article, the Azerbaijanis, they can survive discrimination, but they can't survive life without water.
Thank you, Joseph. I've got a second question. As a fellow of a DC-based think tank, could you please share your observation of the interest or coverage of these very topics, South Azerbaijan, amongst the American political circles? Iran is a hot topic, has been a hot topic for decades, but do you think, have you ever noticed that the South Azerbaijani theme is being allocated enough time, enough attention? What is your experience?
Thank you. Honestly, there's not much discussion around the issue of South Azerbaijan in DC circles, and the number one reason for this, the very largest region, is that the Iranian Azerbaijanis, they just don't have the organization. Unfortunately, they haven't gotten together and really pushed for it. You have to understand that in the American Congress, in order to get a congressman to really champion your issue, you need to be organized and vocal. And also, lawmakers, their number one priorities, they have two main ones, which is re-election and representing their district. These are the biggest ones. And so the Azerbaijani diaspora really needs to get together, especially in areas where they have a significant population, and end up writing letters to their congressmen, forming organizations, telling them that if you don't make a statement on this, if you don't support our cause, you're not going to get our vote. It's that simple. After they are able to do this, I think the best step, because the Azerbaijani diaspora really isn't that big, so they would need to search for allies with similar interests, and there are, they have a lot of potential for it. For example, there are pretty established Turkish organizations active in DC, as well as Israeli and Jewish ones who want a much more belligerent stance taken on Iran. Another reason is that when congressmen or their staffers hear about this issue, hear about the issue of minorities, like Iranian minorities, for example, whether it's the Azerbaijanis, the Kurds, Baluch, it doesn't matter. Sometimes their eyes will glaze over, and they actually do have a good reason for that, and that is they associate it with a call for separatism. In these types of calls, they occasionally hear them, and it's usually from pretty zealous analysts who unrealistically push for it. They act as if they found the key to finally solve the really difficult foreign policy challenge of, say, Iran, say Russia, say China. So it just doesn't sound very realistic, and without an organized group to explain that, no, your support isn't that, this is going to be the main angle they're hearing it from. When it comes to the State Department, I can only speculate. Officials, I think, may have drawn the conclusion that if we were to support minorities inside of Iran, if the regime were to fall, it could lead to a tribalistic mess like what came out of Iraq. You guys have to understand that the Iraq War left a real scar on American lawmakers in terms of not wanting to make that mistake. And the population is very against it for the most part as well. I can understand avoiding the question of separatism. I really do. However, ignoring ethnic grievances, in my eyes, is a very flawed approach to take. Some estimates say that Iranian minorities make up 50% of Iran. How are you supposed to draft a policy? How are you supposed to even understand a country if you're not considering the problems and needs of half its population? And if anything, to me, the situation in Iran reminds me more of the USSR. as minorities are more regionally distributed with their own language and culture. This was actually pointed out by Professor Brenda Schaefer from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. She's done really good work on this, and she pointed out in her book, Iran is more than Persia. She also noted that very often in American foreign policy, when they referred to the Soviet Union, they very oftenly interchangeably would call them Russian. They just assumed that the policy of Russification had succeeded. And so it doesn't matter if you're Georgian, Uzbek, etc., it's Russian. You can see this in speeches if you look back. You can also see it in, movies like Rambo, movies I grew up watching. However, when the Soviet Union finally did collapse, a lot of the people in the American security establishment were actually surprised because they didn't expect ethnic nationalism to play such a role in hastening that collapse. So, with this all said, I do believe that the situation with the Iranian Azerbaijanis may change. There have been some good signs. Just this year, actually, there was a hearing in the EU on the rights of southern Azerbaijanis. There was also a petition by Israeli members of Knesset to recognize South Azerbaijan. This ended up falling flat, but it's a start, and there's starting to be more and more mentions of this issue in the media. It's still not a lot, but it's getting better. I really hope this trend continues and that it spreads to Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. I agree with you, despite being the biggest ethnic minority in Iran, despite the situation of human rights when it comes to ethnic Azerbaijanis in that country. This very topic is usually under-discussed and understudied one at international level.